Welcome again, another episode of Coach's Corner. Want to say thank you to everybody out there who's subscribing and following us, and the views and the comments. We appreciate the love and support. So, on Coach's Corner, we have a lot of diversity of guests that do come on here, from athletes, boxers, people in the sport. And today, we're going to take a little different look at the sport of boxing from the eyes of a gentleman that I've met. And, I've been very blessed in the boxing world where we meet a lot of different individuals who end up being part of our lives. And I have attorney Paul Haberman here with us today. And welcome, Paul. Appreciate you coming up from Jersey today and taking the time out.
Dave, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. A little background on Paul. Paul is not only an attorney, and he does deal with fighters and managers and promoters. He has worked with Joe DeGuardia at Star Boxing, in the back end of the promotional company. He's been around fighters. He's given advice to a lot of top fighters that we're not going to go into right now, but, keep that confidentiality with Paul. But what we're kind of looking at today is I want people to understand, and especially fighters, what is it on the back end of the sport? People see all the fight night. They don't realize what goes into it as far as, a fighter has legalities and contracts and stuff. So, let's kind of start with you, Paul.
All right.
I know your story a little bit, but how did you, typical question I'm going to ask somebody is,
That's fair.
How did you get involved in boxing,
As a fan or as
No,
counsel?
and in the sport. I mean, as a fan, I know you're a big fan. We talk about fights.
Right.
But what lured you to the sport?
I went to law school in my mid-20s, and I had said to myself from day one, I'm giving up a lot to be here. I could be working. I could be developing relationships. I could have stayed in Washington, D.C. I love the city. So I just, as I had the opportunity to do so, I said, I want to do things I'm legitimately interested in doing. And boxing, growing up as a fan, was something I was very much interested in doing. And, before my first summer in law school, I reached out to a bunch of promoters that I knew to be attorneys, including the aforementioned Joe DeGuardia, and wound up working with Joe. And, it was the first of a couple of very rewarding stops, not just in law, but obviously my very first stop in boxing as well at that time as a non-fan.
Yeah, so, Joe DeGuardia with Star Boxing, shout out to them guys. Been in the sport a long time, some great promotional, had some great fighters. We can name them: Chris Algieri, Joe Smith Jr., on and on. I don't want to miss anybody.
No,
there's plenty of them that he had.
A pretty good roster.
Yeah, he had a great roster back in the day.
Does.
And he's still putting on shows and promoting. Now, you're coming out of law school or in law school. For people who don't realize what the sport of boxing is at the level of being involved, whether you're working with a promoter, a fighter, a trainer, boxing's controlled chaos. What are your thoughts when you arrive on the scene here?
Sometimes it's almost better sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have just stayed a fan when you see what goes on a day-to-day basis. But no, it's intriguing. I mean, just the first summer as an intern for Star Boxing, I was looking at contracts. I was watching him interact with fighters. I was, watching him interact with managers. I was listening to managers and their grievances and their demands and and all of a sudden it's like it wasn't just the end product that I saw on television. It was everything that went into it. It's like sometimes you're amazed it got to fight night when you knew what was going on behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah.
You'll see articles like that here and there, especially when they're talking about matchmakers and their problems with, people dropping out and making sure they have enough cards or rather fights on the card. And it all seemed to, drips and drabs. I started to see that in real time, behind the scenes, and I was fascinated. I continued to love the sport, but it was just like another dimension, that wasn't obviously in the public light.
The public
not so.
The public doesn't see that, and to put a fight together at any level, whether it's a major pay-per-view or a local bout, people don't realize what it takes. Just because the two fighters agree that they want to fight each other and it makes sense,
right?
There's a lot of moving parts to get that job done. And, fights are falling out. Fighters don't make weight. Fighters don't get approved by the commission. Pull out. There's 4 million different excuses that can happen up to fight night, and you have to adjust. So, I mean, when you're there at this point, it's not what you see on TV.
Right.
It's not that. I mean, what are your thoughts as you're digging in, because you're right there in the front line now. Because Joe's at that time, we talked about it, right? Joe's putting a lot of shows on at that time.
Right.
He's got ESPN, he's got Showtime, he's got bouts going constantly. He's got fighters that are fighting in the mainstream. So you're busy. It's not like you're doing a onesie twosie, a show here, show there. I'm dealing with some paperwork.
Right.
I mean, what are your thoughts? Like, here, you're in law school, educated, coming out, looking at contracts, and you're saying, "What the hell is this? This makes no sense."
Right. Well, that's why I was almost glad I had the education in law school from working with him, because by the time I got out of law school, to your point, 6 months later, 8 months later, whatever it was, I was managing my fighter, Ali the Hurricane Ubali.
So you got bit like everybody else, right? You got bit. The bug bit you in boxing, right? And this is what. And look, I've been on the end of managing fighters, training, and it's a tough gig.
Right.
How do you get bit to manage from there? Now, is it because, hey, I'm in the sport? You obviously got a passion, which is great, but how do you figure I'm going to manage a guy now?
Well,
where does that come from? Out of you're looking at contracts, and now, boom, I'm thrown in full blown.
Interesting set of circumstances. I had a good friend, still have a good friend from college who was very well connected on the boxing scene in France.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the Acaris brothers, who were very big into European promoters back in the day. And he's in the city one day, in New York City. That's where I was living at the time. And calls me to go to dinner and drinks. And he starts asking me how would I like to manage a fighter, because Ali wanted to start fighting in the United States. He'd been an Olympian in France. All his fights had been on television overseas. 15-3, 14 knockouts, and me, a young attorney at my first firm, probably making about 2 bottle caps and dead frog, as far as my income that year. And so the idea of managing somebody that's already gotten a lot of television, has an Olympic pedigree, has a punch, fan-friendly, I was like, sign me up, Next thing I know, a few weeks later, he coordinates it, and I'm on the back of Ali's moped, weaving through traffic with him in Miami Beach right before we sign our contract. Probably 10 minutes after meeting him, I'm already almost being killed by him in traffic.
Oh, my God. So now you're thrown into this management end. What's that like for you? Because I know what it's like, and you obviously know what it's like now. Tell everybody, I mean, people think you get a fighter, and you had a good fighter. You had a guy that had some interest and had a pedigree, so you weren't building a guy.
Right.
You were taking a product that already had been started, so that's a good start in the management end. But kind of walk us through, the fans out there, I don't think realize what a manager is really like in the boxing world.
Well, I mean, for me, I was taking a very legalistic approach, as you would expect as a green attorney at the time. I was to him what we contracted for me to be to him. By that, I mean, if I was committing a certain number of fights per year, if I was going to be the one negotiating with sponsors, whatever it was that made it into my contract with him, supposedly I had represented anybody else with anybody, that's what I was going to do. So if he comes to me from the gym, and says, oh, this fighter is getting gym fees and this fighter got a signing bonus, how come you didn't give me a signing bonus? My response, whether it was him, whether it be anybody else, wasn't negotiated. It might not be the greatest way to retain certain fighters, like say if I had 10 of them and they all got to a certain level where they deserve more money or more attention or more expenses, but I held people to their contract, and for me, it made life a little easier. Like I wasn't getting calls about anything and everything. I was getting calls about the stuff that was.
Yeah, it made sense when contracts of fights and negotiations came into play. But as like you were just speaking about, certain managers do certain things for fighters. Everything is it's what you're bringing to the table was your legal background, your background to negotiate, your background to take care of the fighter on the legal end. But were your aspirations to have more fighters after that, or when you first started working with him, were you thinking, hey, I want to corral this into, start with him and, hopefully get a couple of more?
I was thinking about that, but, then you start to realize a little bit, too, about the economics of the sport. I mean, maybe he was a bad example because he was here on a visa. And he was only supposed to be working, so money was necessarily had to be poured into him and others like him, to keep them going between fights. But even with guys that are local products, they're not making money immediately.
Right.
They might expect to make more money than they're getting immediately. And so there's a lot of sort of logistics that go into it. And the question becomes, when does the manager actually get allowed to make
anything
money
back? When does
right.
But you know what?
So,
it's maybe playing the stock market. Okay, are you willing to pony up some money?
Right.
Okay, and hope that what you're putting money into is going to come back to you somewhere along the line. But as we know now, and now from your experience, those early stages are tough. You got to have some, you got to be able to withstand the storm mentally on your own and then financially with fighters, because there's always something going to come up. Whether a fighter is solvent on money or not, if you're involved, something's going to come up. They're going to need money. My car, my girlfriend, my this, my that, equipment, this, whatever. They're coming up short somewhere, unless they're the one percenters. Unless they're the one percenters out there making, millions and $1 million on a fight. They're under a good promotional contract. They have some sponsors. They have a stream of income coming in. Maybe they're set up. But in the beginning game, I don't think people realize what it takes to move a fighter. I mean, what I say to people this, look, if you're 20-0 as a pitcher in baseball, teams are opening up the checkbook for you. You have 1 year. 1 year. Actually, let's not even use 20 anymore, because that's the old benchmark. If you win 10, 15 games and you look promising, they're going to open. Think about a fighter. There's fighters out there that are 10-0 that are very good fighters, not taking a check. There are fighters out there at 15-0, not taking a good check. There are fighters who are 20-0, not making a good living in the sport.
Right. It sounds insane, but you have to ask yourself, who is behind them, and are they able to put them in that position at that point in time? Like, I had a pretty good fortune with Ali. Wound up signing with Star Boxing. Star Boxing had seen him on an undercard of a Lou Delvaux title fight in France. Liked what they saw, knew that he was good television. Immediately started kind of aggressively putting him towards the media, for bigger television sort of fights. Not everybody is like that. Some guys, you hear examples all throughout the years. Great prospects can't sell 2 tickets, or great fighter, but nobody wants to watch him fight.
Nobody wants to watch him fight. Can't sell him to television or stream today. So you're stuck within a quagmire. And then look, at 20 wins for a fighter, if they're fighting 4 years, 4 fights a year, that's 5 years of their life. And as we know, as the fights get more 8 and 10 rounds, you're not fighting 4 times a year all the time.
Right.
You're lucky if you're fighting 2.
Although, what's interesting, I'm reading a book right now, not to plug him inadvertently, but there's a famous British boxing writer, Steve Bunce, wrote this 50-year history of boxing from like the 70s through the earlier 2000s on every big fight for every British fighter. It's a great read. Honestly, I'll get you the name. But he talks about guys taking these savage beatings and cuts and everything, but just to keep the money flowing, they're fighting 3 weeks later. It's the 70s, early 80s. They're fighting 3 weeks later, a month later. They're getting these big money opportunities all the time, but they're sacrificing their bodies. Their careers are over earlier in the process.
Well, there was no, and kind of go into something like that. If we go back in the United States, back in the 30s, 40s, and the 50s, and early 60s, prize fighting was there was a way for certain people to make a living and provide for their family.
Right.
In New York, you had shows being put on in all the boroughs. Mm-hmm. You had Tuesday night fights and you had Friday night fights at the old Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Okay? So they're running every week there, pretty much, right? Different shows, Sunnyside Garden, all through the boroughs were doing shows, local shows, okay? So there was a fighter, and he's related to me by marriage, Joey Archer. Joey Archer fought, I believe his record was 45-4 or 45-2 as a pro.
Okay.
He fought Emil Griffin twice for the title in the Garden and lost. And he beat Sugar Ray Robinson in Robinson's last fight at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, wow.
Which a lot of people don't know. Robinson was done, but he did. Okay? If you look at his box rec and you look at him, there were times he fought 4 times in a month.
Right. And
4 times in a month.
And you marvel at that now. Like,
yes.
Perfect example from what I've read in this book so far. You know, you probably know Alan Minter is the guy that Hagler won the title from.
Yep.
Finally, you know. Minter was fighting constantly going into that fight. And he was cut prone. And his face, I mean, should have fallen apart on.
Like Swiss cheese.
Yeah. I mean, but us in the U.S. just know that he was the guy that gave Hagler his first title. But Minter went hard. I mean, he was a perfect example of a guy from that era that just like fought every couple of weeks, no matter what shape his face or whatever was in, because he was getting these decent money opportunities all over Europe, in some cases all over the world. The losses didn't matter because some of them weren't even seen on television. He always gave a good effort. So,
I mean, the European market always has been a little bit has paid more.
Okay.
As we see fighters. And now we see the fights in Saudi, and we see.
Right.
But back in the day, the European market was always a good market for a fighter to go over there and you know, make a good wage. But back to you here, managing.
Okay, if you insist.
Back to you. You know, so you're managing here. How long before you say, hey, maybe this is not what I really want to be in the part of boxing, or how do you separate from the management end?
I mean, we kind of wound down for one reason or another, and then you know, I actually had an opportunity very shortly thereafter to manage an Olympian. But by that time, I said to myself, you know, I lost a good amount of money the first go around. You know, and on top of that, for an Olympian in particular, you got to say to yourself, would I love the opportunity as a second or third year attorney at that point? Who wouldn't love that opportunity?
Even if you were a 20th year attorney,
right,
to get a chance at an Olympic prospect,
right? But then the question was, can I do right by him? Or one day are people going to say he didn't maximize his potential because this guy was too distracted by his day job at a bigger New York law firm to really commit to moving this guy the way he should, or getting him the right promoter or the right nutrition or whatever else. So I agreed at that point. It was almost the decision was made for me. I want to stay involved. I appreciate the relationships, but I'll do the legal end. You know, I'll look at the contracts for them. You know, I'll give them, you know, some intuition on certain pitfalls maybe they should look out for, but I can't do the management stuff. I'm sort of in the glass, break glass when needed. You know? Yeah. I'm there for emergencies. I'm there if you need to mess with your manager or promoter a little bit. If you need to question the contract, if you need to question the bout agreement, you know. Yeah. Come get me. But I can't manage. I decided I can't manage.
There's a lot today, I think, whereas maybe years ago, you know, managers made sure their fighters made a wage. They made sure they made money. But today, the marketability of a fighter, and just we'll take example of what you're talking about, someone who fought for the Olympic team, if they win a medal, I mean, there's more moving parts to moving that fighter.
Right.
Obviously, it's easier to get them fights because everybody wants to see them. But what you're talking about is maximizing potential today. And now, easy on some parts if you have a top fighter. How do you maximize potential from your end on your B-level fighters, your lower A-level fighters?
Right.
You know, how does that roll? And is that something that you bring to the table for a fighter, or is it just making sure that they're taken care of and protected legally?
Right. I mean, look, I always say whether it's a boxing client or any client, you know, I do a wide array of litigation. I do health law. I represent medical professionals too. The question is, how hard do you want me to go? I could go as hard as you want me to go as the attorney. but I'm happy when you're happy. So, you know, if
Right.
a fighter or his manager comes to me and says we have this promotional agreement, whether it's a B or C level fighter, to your question, how hard do you want me to negotiate this? I could give you the red line. I could tell you what's wrong with it. I could tell you what should be in it. I could tell you what I personally wouldn't sign if I had my druthers. But you have to want to sign it or not sign it at the end, and you have to not want to scare off the promoter or the manager, whoever's contract I'm looking at. So,
Yeah.
all I could do is tell you what I could see, and because I'm not starstruck anymore. Like if I was looking at this as a kid in the '80s,
it's a business now for you.
right?
You have a reputation, okay? You're known in the sport,
That's good
okay?
news.
So
I
it's
think.
like, look, well, it is because you want to keep that credibility,
Right.
right? You want to be like, and look how we came to Met, you know, through a couple of different parties, and here we are today,
Right.
sitting down. But you know what? And you know, knowing what I know about you and what you've done is, look, I'll put that out there anywhere. I mean, I think you bring a credible factor to the table with a lot of guys out there today that don't know. You know, no disrespect to fighters, trainers, or managers. Some of them are not businessmen. They think they're businessmen.
Right.
Okay, they think, okay, because they're the product that they can demand this, that, and everything. But that's not the case out there. We see fighters, we see people who come up shortchanged because maybe somebody didn't read their contract.
Right.
Maybe they signed where they shouldn't have. They agreed upon things, or maybe the guy didn't negotiate the best way.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what do you look at if a fighter comes into you and says, hey, I'm so-and-so, you know, my record is this, I'm signed or I'm not signed.
Mm-hmm.
What is your advice? And you're talking to a fighter who's going to move forward in his career, whether he's going to sign with a promotional company, a manager. What are you talking to him about at that point? Kind of walk us through that so that people understand that dynamic.
Well, yeah, part of that would turn on where they are in their career. You know, if they're coming to me as for management or a promotional agreement, and they're sort of maybe they're a decent regional amateur turning pro, something like that, and they're wondering how much they should be asking for, you know, per fight, or is this enough per fight? It's kind of like, well, what you should do is maybe take what's being offered now because they're willing to build you. There's going to be a lot of money. You know, you don't want to take 2 bottle caps and a dead frog per round. You know, some sort of decent wage to make continuing to fight worthwhile for you. But you have to understand at the beginning of a career, unless you're, you know, a dynamo, you know, unless you're somebody like Lucien Boutte where you could be in a world title fight in 10 fights, or one of the Cubans, you're going to be built up against guys that are perceived as humps or soft touches early on. Right. Most of that is a loss for the promoter or manager. So, but if you just want the money early, I mean, that's how you potentially get yourself in sort of perilous situations, because that's where the promoter or manager is like, all right, I'll put down the money. You know, I'm a businessman, but here's what's also going to happen. Rather than gradually build you to 15-0 against the right people, maybe I get you to 10-0, and all of a sudden some blue chip prospect needs a B-side on Showbox or DAZN, and I'm going to say, wow, that's more money than it's been offered, and I've already laid out all this money. Let's see if he sinks or swims, and if he sinks, I at least have a good payday where I can get some of my money back. If he swims, all of a sudden he takes the step up that you've been waiting for. So, you know, you could claim genius internally either way. So
yeah, but I think a lot of fighters, what you're saying makes sense because we understand that. We understand the dynamics behind the scenes of what's happening and what the investment is in fighters. And look, businessmen are businessmen. They're not just writing checks for the hell of writing checks because you know they want to see a little return on their investment, right?
Right.
But I think a lot of people, a lot of fighters don't realize that, you know, that either they got to take a chance in a fight, whether, like you say, it's a step up or their management or promotional company is saying, hey, we'd like to make a little money too. We've invested in you. You know, what do you want to be? And I think we have a lot of cherry picking and fighting today, where it's like, okay, no, I don't want to fight him yet. I don't want to fight him yet, or I don't want to do this yet. And I get it. Some of the fights don't make sense financially. You should not fight certain people when maybe that fight's going to be there in another fight or two, and it's going to be worth more money to you.
Right. The whole idea of marinating.
I get it. I get that stuff. But I also think that some fighters don't realize that, you know what, we understand they're the product, but they don't realize what's being invested into them, that it's got to be, how's that guy getting it back?
Right.
You know, if you take front money, if you take a signing bonus, say, I don't want to even call it front money. Say you take a signing bonus. Some people say, well, part of that signing bonus might have to come back.
Well, let me tell you an interesting story about that. I had a client of some repute, we'll say. One of his handlers calls me, very excited. He says, this manager offered a signing bonus of several $100,000. And I was like, that's great. Let me see the contract. Let me see, the context, make sure we're understanding this. And I get the contract. The money's there, except that it's an advance.
Right.
That's not an unconditional signing bonus. That's how it was phrased, at least in this situation, was if the fighter makes above a certain amount for any of his fights, all of a sudden the manager is able to claw back that signing bonus. So if he never gets there, the signing bonus doesn't get clawed back, which is nice, except that you want to get there. So you have to be prepared for that money to be taken back out.
And on the flip side of that, if somebody's offering that signing bonus to a fighter, a manager, okay, they feel that fighter's going to get there.
Right, exactly.
They're willing to say, okay, guys,
and he did. I should say.
I'm gonna put up X amount of dollars because they know what they saw.
Right.
They've done their due diligence. They kind of see what the playing field looks like. Depending on the division, if he's a heavyweight, we already know. If he can punch a little bit and he can withstand something, we know he's going to be put into a fight where he can make money.
Right.
We already know that. Okay, with the landscape of boxing right now. But I think back to the same thing. I hear the stories with fighters. I see it over X amount of years. No disrespect to anybody out there, but there's a lot of guys out there don't do their homework when they get that contract.
Right.
Whether it's from a manager or a promotional company. We were talking outside about a fighter signing with a promotional company. It's great. Hey, man, I got my deal.
Right.
I got my deal. What's your deal? Okay, your deal could be for no money and you're going to fight 5 times a year.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And then all of a sudden they want out of the deal.
Right.
So where do we educate a fighter at that point? Where do we educate management at that point? Because some managers who have been in the game, they're reputable people. They have fighters.
Right.
You can go down the list and say, okay, I've managed this guy, this guy, this guy. Man, those guys made some money. They're doing okay. They've gotten in good fights. And then, look at this side of this manager. But at the end of the day, the fighter needs to be educated. How do we educate a fighter now?
Yeah.
Like that.
I do my small part.
Yeah. I think you do it a lot more than people realize now, knowing from dealing with you and everything like that. But, what is it that you see can be better for these fighters today out there?
I think they need to be aware of certain traps that obviously attorneys and more veteran managers are aware of in agreements. I'm talking about that, tolling provisions, lack of minimum purses for certain levels of fights, morals clauses. I'm trying to think of other things that would be pitfalls, sort of wishy-washy purse bid provisions, provisions that allow certain rights in the fighter that the fighter might even realize what they are that are being taken. Certain extension provisions. You want to ask yourself, are those really goalposts that suggest the promoter did anything, or are those just really easy to hit goalposts as long as the promoter has you for 3 years? So there's a lot of little things like that where you're like, if you know what you're looking for, you could say, is that really fair, or is that really, crafted or negotiated as well as it could be in that particular circumstance? So one example actually from the last year that cracked me up, or last 2 years, I don't know if you're familiar with NFTs, non-fungible tokens, these digital assets that people were trading, especially like 2-3 years ago. There was a quote-unquote like standard provisions addendum to a promotional agreement I was reviewing where the promoter basically reserved his right to exploit the fighter's image with no money back to the fighter in NFTs and other digital assets. I said to his people, I was like, do you understand what you're potentially giving away? Do you understand how much money is going into like Bored Apes Club and all this other NFT stuff right now? And you're just summarily like, if I'm not here or a manager's not here that picks up on that, that fighter could be giving away lots of money if they get big. Because all of a sudden the promoter is like, he won a championship or he had the fight of the year. I'm going to start selling NFTs of him that he has no right to any money from because he didn't agree to it.
Right.
He didn't negotiate.
He just signed off on it. He gave you all the power right there.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, and they'll do that because they could get away with it. A lot of fighters or managers are just happy to be there. What the broad strokes? How many fights per year? Does this guy have juice? Does this guy have access to DAZN or promoters that could have DAZN or other networks or services? So, and the rest of the stuff like that gets lost. So,
well, I think a lot of it gets lost in the sense is that at the higher level, and I shouldn't just say at the higher level, fighters see the contract, right? They get a contract, they're going to fight, whether it's from the manager. They're looking at it how much, right off the rip.
Right.
What am I getting paid?
And that's the bottom line a lot of the time.
Right. The first question is, what am I getting paid?
Right.
Okay. And sometimes the number's good, sometimes the number's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Not what they think it is. But, I think what I say is, look, you need to have an attorney look at your contract. And that means somebody, I'm not talking about a guy you meet in the diner who's a friend of a friend. No, I'm going to look at your contract for you. No. You need to let somebody look at that contract, especially in a bigger fight where we're talking a lot of money or TV rights, stuff like that, where there are a lot of different parties. And I'm going to say still, even at a contract level of a 4-round fight, somebody should look at your fight to make sure, okay.
Yeah, because one day you could be a 12-rounder under the same contract.
Because, you don't know what they're putting in that contract at a 4-round fight and saying, look, you owe me 5 fights after this.
Right.
Just going back to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys, well, this is the number I want for the fight.
Right.
They forget about everything else across the board. They forget, like, if the fight's being a pay-per-view, are they going to resell that pay-per-view?
Right.
Who's promoting it? Are they promoting your name? Do you have to do promotional for it? All these moving parts.
Are you selling tickets? Yeah.
Are you selling tickets? What's your percentage back on the tickets?
Right.
Okay? Now, the other factor is, what's your tax obligation after you pay everybody? Because your number maybe, we'll throw $100,000 out there.
Right.
That's not your number.
No.
That's a good number maybe. You see that number on the I'm going to make no, you're not. Because now, where's it going? Tell us where it goes off that $100,000.
So industry standard, and we were talking about this beforehand too. You got the trainer. I think it's maybe he splits with the cut man the 10%. Maybe he doesn't. So maybe to your point earlier, that goes up to 15%. Manager in most jurisdictions could take up to 33 1/3. Doesn't mean they do every time. I could get more into that in a moment. And then you have sort of that regulatory gray area where you have an advisor maybe also. They take a percentage. So you figure even on a $100,000 purse, what if you just stopped at manager and trainer? 43% is already gone. As much as 43% is already gone. Never mind the cut man or the advisor or anybody else.
And before the government.
And before the government, yep.
Before the taxes go out. So your $100,000 just maybe got whacked to 50%.
And maybe you have a nutritionist. How much do they take for the fight?
Or whoever took money up front from you, or who didn't take money up front from you, let me correct myself, who maybe you said, okay, I'm going to pay you after the fight. Nutritionist, strength and condition coach, apparel, uniform. We can go down the line.
Yep. It doesn't end.
You know what I mean? It doesn't. And then a lot of fighters come back and say, I only made X.
Right.
Okay, but you didn't safeguard yourself. You didn't look at what the whole deal was and say, okay, tell me what I'm going to make after everything's said and done.
Right. And in fairness, sometimes you can't. The expenses are the expenses, but it's like at least you could try to negotiate a little more if you know what you're looking at.
Look, the fixed expenses of getting you ready for the fight are the fixed expenses.
Right.
You're going to have to pay your strength and conditioning coach. If you have a nutritionist, you're going to have to pay them. Food, all that stuff is a fixed expense of doing business, right? You're doing that's your business.
Yep.
The rest of the expense is for you to understand so that you don't feel cheated at the end of the day.
Right.
But as we go on and on and on, and we're seeing numbers, we're seeing crazy numbers being paid out for fights. Do you think that's changing the landscape of the fighting sport, and is that realistic, or is that just?
I think
we're just seeing a boom right now.
Yeah, well, obviously there's the bump coming from the Middle East that you were alluding to before, and very thankfully for boxing, you have somebody over there that's very committed to just energizing the sport. It's almost like he dreams up a fight. He has the budget for it, and it's like the most beautiful thing that could happen to boxing right now. Whether it could last, we don't know, but right now we're living in it. But does it set an unrealistic expectation? Yes, because for every fight in Saudi Arabia, there's going to be 80 going on across the world any given month that don't have anywhere near that budget. So you can make your decision to stay active and take what you could get to stay active, or get on moderately bigger cards, or you could just pray that somebody calls you as a B-side last minute in Saudi, and even if you're eighth from the main event, you'll still have a pretty good payday. But you have to earn that payday. You earn that payday by staying active and keeping yourself out there. So, that's why you take these smaller fights, even if they're regional. Maybe somebody sees a video and says, that guy could fight. We got to see more of that. And that's what's happened very much so. Now the fighters could go viral, more than they could when I was managing.
Oh, yeah.
So,
listen, today the whole – look, you can put a fighter in whether you're a manager or a trainer today. Okay, we see people building fighters without managers, without promoters, maybe an advisor. You want to call them an advisor type. We see fighters getting built to 10, 11, 12 and 0, and like we were talking about, somebody did all the heavy lifting, and now we're gonna hand them off to maybe an Al Heyman, a Bob Arum, or somebody to say, hey, I invested the money already in this gentleman. I've already put in all the blood, sweat, and tears. Here he is.
Right.
Here he is. But that's because of social media, too. The guys that you never saw fighting in the Midwest or the Deep South who've come out of nowhere now, everybody knows who's who in the fight game pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be a couple of years ago, and probably still is to some extent. Take a guy like Samson Lukowicz. All of a sudden he arrives on U.S. soil with the next dynamo from parts unknown, weight unknown, and it's like, wow, this guy could fight. Everybody, not everybody, but more people have that opportunity to see that guy now before.
Well, look, and for people who don't know him, look, he was a big player in South America with a lot of South American fighters back in the day, and always brought good fighters.
Yeah,
always brought good fighters.
Yep.
Now people know him. I mean, there are fighters gravitating to him because he's got guys fighting on big pay-per-views. Throughout the year, where maybe 20, 25 years ago, only the real boxing people knew, let's call him up, or let's call...
Right.
But now it's all over the place. I think one thing I do like about getting back to Saudi is that they're putting good fights together.
Yeah.
So you know what? If no risk, no reward type of thing, right? Like, look, you want to fight? You're 20-0?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to put you against him. You want it? There it is. This is what it's paying. It's paying better than any fight in the state. We know that, even if it's not the main event. So if you're down the line, if you're the first bout there, you're still going to make more money than you're probably making in the state.
Right.
You got to take that shot, in my opinion.
Plus, even off television.
Yes.
If, for example, the Sheikh heard that, you're a dynamic young prospect, and he sees you off TV and likes what you see, that's a huge opportunity, too, even if you're the first fight on the undercard that's not televised for 4 more hours.
Absolutely. They're going to bring you back.
Yep.
I mean, it goes back to marketability, and, making sure you're entertaining out there.
Right.
Right now, boxing fans know who the fighters are. The hardcore boxing fans, we could sit here and talk about fighters. Most people are not going to know who they are.
Right.
They're not going to know certain fighters, right?
Nope.
The public out there, you got to sell yourself to the public. That's the people that are paying. It's not the hardcore boxing fans driving boxing anymore.
Right.
We need to have that mainstream UFC attitude where, people who are not everyday hardcore fans are out there. I want to go to that event.
Right.
Yeah, I like what I see. I watched his social media, or I watched our social media. I want to see this fight. This fight's got something that.
To your point with UFC, you could look at a UFC card and say, maybe with a rare exception here and there that fights for Bellator or PFL or something. I'm watching the two of the best guys in this division that haven't fought each other yet, fighting each other on this card week in and week out when I'm buying a UFC card. So,
Yeah. But he, you know what? You got to give Dana White credit. He built his base. He does put good fights on. All right. It's put a lot of people in the stands. I remember watching some of the earlier events when his weigh-ins were getting more people than boxing events.
wow, yeah.
You know, I don't know if you remember on some of those earlier cards when UFC was starting to come out and really starting to gain momentum, they'd have people at the weigh-in, and it was like, what the heck is this guy doing?
Yeah,
why can't we get that momentum with boxing?
It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, and you look at it, and not just UFC. Now more recently, you're looking at guys like Jake Paul, and you're like, how does this guy with no amateur background, basically YouTube loudmouth growing up, how does he become one of the biggest ticket sellers in boxing? Because he markets himself. There's a lot of very talented fighters that it's not a detriment to them. They are what they are, but they're not social media presences. They're not like they're working their craft, but they're not really marketing or getting to the point of selling themselves the way somebody, say Jake Paul, did, or maybe fighters like Oscar De La Hoya got that sort of backing from HBO, but we don't really have that anymore either. So
no, well, you know what? We go back to the old adage: money moves the fighter. Whether it's your money or somebody else's money, money moves the fighter, right? With Jake Paul, your opinion, and I have my own on him. Okay, what are your thoughts about him for the sport? Let's put it that way. I'll put it to you first.
It was interesting when I first started hearing about him. All I'd see is just like still shots of him tongue out, just annoying faces, whatever. But my turning point came when I watched the Real Sports with Brian Gumbel's segment on him, and I saw him in Puerto Rico, and I saw him training, committing himself to sort of this somewhat Spartan lifestyle training, and he looks physically impressive when you see him fight. Like his body is in great shape, and I started, I was like, look, is he gonna beat real opponents that came up through the backwaters, through the amateurs, through the Olympics? I don't know, but he's committing to it. He's giving money to some young fighters that do deserve it on his undercards, and women fighters that deserve it on his undercards, and I have something of an appreciation for him now that I didn't have for the first, say, 5 years I was hearing about him. So, but
well, you know what? I have, at first I was like, what the hell's, what are we doing, right? What are we doing here? But when he put that first show, it was on Showtime in Cleveland on a Sunday night, and he had that place sold out on a Sunday night in Cleveland, Ohio. No disrespect to Cleveland, Ohio, okay?
Right.
But you're putting 18,000, 19,000 people in that arena. Okay. Then I saw how he paid out his fighters. Okay. I'm saying, not bad. Fighters are getting paid.
Right.
You know what? He put a great event on. Okay. Can he fight? I don't know. I say to everybody else, he doesn't have to get out of bed. We've had conversations with different guests here, and we always come back with the Jake Paul thing because he's always in the main fighting Tyson. He's always in the mainstream right now. Right. So it's a conversation that keeps coming back. It doesn't fade away. Like everybody says, this guy, where is he? Oh, he's going to be done. But he keeps coming back. He's there. Right.
He is a reality of boxing today.
He is a reality of boxing. He's financially a very good reality of boxing. Right now, as far as, he's our Saudi right here in the
As I was going to say
to
our point about Saudi, if you're not fighting there, but you're fighting on one of his cards, that's one of the better compensated ones stateside.
Absolutely. So, he's put on probably the greatest woman fighting bout that we ever saw between Katie Taylor and Serrano. We're going to see that fight again.
Yep.
That fight was outstanding. From a fighting fan, forget about it, females fighting, right? Those were two warriors, one of the better fights I've saw out there. I mean, if you couldn't get into that fight and watch that fight happen, two warriors. And I'm really hope that they bring that back July 20th. So he's done that, right? He trains. Can he fight? He's not afraid to get in the ring.
Nope.
He brings the right people around him. He brings sparring partners in that are legit. We've known some guys that have gone there. We've known some trainers that have been there. Chad Dawson's been down there with him from our area. You know, he's had Mosley in there, BJ Flores. You know, he's got trainers in there now.
Our former world champions are talking about with quite a bit of craft.
You know what I mean?
Too.
So it's interesting to see what's going to play out. People say, oh, what's going to happen with Tyson and him? I don't know. Can't call it. I want to see what happens with this kid down the road. 4 more fights from now, 5 more fights.
Yeah, I mean, look, could Tyson knock him out at 57 years old?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he can.
I think if Tyson lands flush, he could knock the moon out of the sky. But
Listen, think like this, right? I never met Mike Tyson. I never seen him fight in person. I never seen him train. Watched him growing up like everybody else. Okay? He still can punch.
yes,
If he walked up and hit somebody with 1 shot flush, it's going to hurt. I don't care. You could tell me about his 8, yes. But my feeling is this. Jake Paul's got to be perfect all night.
right.
Tyson got to be perfect once.
I
And Jake Paul has not seen a hurricane coming at him like this. And it's still Mike Tyson.
Right.
Think about him biting Holyfield's ear. Think about him knocking people out.
Yep.
I had Peter McNeely on the show last week. It'll be coming out on Sunday talking
wow.
about
Okay.
the Tyson knockout and everything. And, yeah, that's real. That's a real man coming at you right now. Okay, he's older.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, will he Charlie Horse after 3 rounds? Maybe.
Maybe.
But until then,
Maybe. But
Yeah,
what if he hits Jake Paul in the first round?
right.
And we've seen this in boxing. We've seen, come on, we can name fights all and over. No offense, I remember one fight growing up as a kid, Kenny Norton, Muhammad Ali.
Right.
All right, Ali's supposed to beat Kenny Norton. Kenny Norton's a muscular guy,
Right.
great shape and everything else. Throws the left hook, breaks Muhammad Ali's jaw in Yankee Stadium.
Yep.
Okay, so a puncher's always got a chance, especially heavyweights and cruiserweights. They got chances.
Right. Right.
They could be dying in the last round. Throwing 1 punch can change a fight. We've seen it. We've seen it happen at so many levels. But, I don't know. I kind of like, I want to see the guy be successful, to be honest with you. People have signed him off because he's an opinionated guy. He's a wealthy guy. He's,
Right.
He's of that millennial generation that, doesn't resonate well with a lot of the old fight fans and
Right,
trainers
right.
and boxers, and they don't think he's real. But I'd like to see him be successful, to be honest with you, because I think, at the end of the day, money or no money, he's putting in the work, and that's what fighting's about. There are
Yeah.
guys out there making no money out there training as hard as him.
Yeah, that is a fact.
You know what I mean? But so I don't know. I kind of like to see, what kind of plays out here.
It would be an interesting thing for him to do if he wants really long-term longevity and notoriety in the sport. Aside from winning, obviously winning will make him attractive for a long time in the sport, but I think his weight is right around that new Bridgerweight class where there's just not a lot of talent to even draw attention to it right now. Jake Paul could really make an impression on the sport if he stayed at Bridgerweight and really committed himself
Yeah, he
to
can
building
make
up
that
division.
Bridgerweight, which is 200 to 225.
Yeah,
Okay? But nobody's promoted that weight.
he can. I'm saying.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
Yeah.
if you look at that, they created that division.
Uh-huh.
And I believe it's, I'm going to say Oscar Rivas from Montreal who holds the belt in that division.
I know he did. I honestly couldn't tell you who does right now.
I don't think
and that's part of
anybody.
the problem.
I think it's him.
So-
I don't think anybody else has fought for that, Paul.
Right.
And you haven't seen any fights on cards saying, okay, in the Bridgerweight division,
Right.
on any mainstream cards. See heavyweights, we see middleweights, lightweights, welterweights, but we haven't seen that. Jake Paul can fly into that because of size. He doesn't have to fight a big heavyweight.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he is bigger than a lot of cruiserweights out there, but who knows? I mean, there are some cruiserweights making a couple of noises right now that hold WBC belts. Don King has a few.
Right.
I think we have another one coming out in Saudi on this card. I'd have to check. A lot of them being in Europe holding the,
Right.
but who knows? But I think it's going to be interesting with him. It's going to be interesting. So right now, let's go back to you for a second. We're getting off the track here.
Okay.
Where do you see yourself being in boxing now, going forward? Do you have more aspirations to be involved in the sport other than where you're at?
I welcome all the opportunities I have. I mean, I don't go out of my way to market exclusively in boxing. I have a good law practice outside of it. But I've had, worked with 8 current or former world champions. I've worked with a number of promoters, worked with a number of managers, a number of ranked contenders. I've seen a little of almost every situation in the sport. And I'm somebody that's kind of positioned myself where I think you were alluding to the fact that I'm something of a name, known entity among the attorneys. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But I also haven't gone out of my way to make a lot of friends because I never know when the person I'm going against one day, I'm going to have to go against again. Like, I don't want to ask for tickets from a promoter that I'm negotiating against. So I'm not going to have that strong relationship. It allows me that freedom to go at him next time.
Boxing is a small world. We network in a small world where a lot of people know each other, and we end up circling back.
Yeah, I'd rather be respected than somebody that just butchers tickets. I
agree,
because I want to have that advantage.
You know what? Your reputation in the sport means everything, and look, you don't know where you're going to end up, whether you're dealing with a promoter or a manager or a fighter, how it comes back around on you. And I'm with you. Like, look, certain situations might work for me, certain situations might not. I'm going to be respectful to that and give my honest opinion and say, hey, I can help you, I can't, whatever the case may be.
Right.
But not burn any bridges there. But, I mean, back to this again, I still think today, and back to fighting, one other thing that we were talking about, money moving the fighter and Jake Paul, and boxing and UFC. UFC is UFC.
Right.
There is no underlining sanctioning bodies, 20 different, people involved. Dana White calls the shot.
Right.
You cannot walk into UFC and promote a show.
Right.
Dana White's taken all that. He's got it locked down. Even though you have a good financial package, maybe he'll agree, but he's not putting your name up there. It's all going to be UFC. Maybe he'll take some. Who knows?
UFC is the reason for the season, not just the fighter necessarily. Right.
Whereas in boxing, money comes into boxing and can be a major player, whether you know the sport or not.
Right.
Do you think that should change? Personal opinion. Where do you see that going with the future?
I think it depends who has the money at a given time. I mean, if you're talking about His Excellency right now.
No, I mean, should we have one? Okay, let's call it the WBC. Forget everybody else for a second. Should it be one entity in boxing?
If there was one entity that could execute as well as the UFC or the WWE or something like that, I think that'd be a beautiful thing for the sport, but I think it's nearly impossible to pull off at this point in time. Because you have the other sanctioning bodies, you have promoters that want their say in things.
True, but you know what? The main entity is the WBC. At the end of the day, to me, they carry the most weight.
I mean,
honestly, if I'm putting no disrespect to anybody else, first belt I want that green belt. I want that WBC belt.
Certainly has the history for sure. Yeah.
I want Mr. Suleiman handing that belt to my fighter in the ring. Yep. You know what? No disrespect to anybody else. I think honestly it's just a distraction that leads other people into how do you have one true champion?
Right.
How do you have one true champion that way? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, sanctioning bodies, I got all of these. Great. Put everybody in one pool.
Right.
And I know financially it's not going to happen.
Right.
It's not.
It'd
we go back to Super 6. Go back to tournaments like that where fighters, and I talk about this a lot. It's not going to happen, but make everybody fight off. Make the best fighters fight off. You want fans to be involved.
Well, the beautiful thing about the Super 6 is by the end, you didn't need to know Andre Ward had this title or that title. You need to know Andre Ward spent the last 2 or 3 years beating some of the best in his division.
Yeah.
Every fight out.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful thing to behold. So
Right, and then look where his career. Well, actually, if you look at the majority of those guys in there, Froch, Kessler, Andre Ward, I know,
Darrell,
Darrell. I'm missing a couple other guys in there. I don't,
Kessler. Oh, you said Kessler.
I said Kessler. Kessler up to a couple years ago. I mean, he lost to Crawford.
Yep.
But Mikhail Kessler was no walk in the park.
He was a beast. I was hearing, at some point before the Super Six. I'm not sure how I got involved. I think it was when I was managing early on. I was just putting feelers out everywhere, and I got involved with this Danish boxing forum. And they're just Kessler was like the biggest source of excitement. That they'd had there in a long time. Think how barren the cupboard was. What was the last Danish fighter before him? You were talking about Brian Nielsen, probably. Kessler had the substance. Nielsen was a guy that was fighting has-beens and then got a Tyson fight. But
Kessler had the substance. He could fight. He had the body. He had the look.
He had sponsorship from Jack and Jones, so he had nice gear.
He could have been today very, very more marketable fighter.
Yeah. With
the internet and social media. Carl Froch was a beast.
Oh, the only reason Froch has his props now, but he was almost unfortunately in Calzaghe's shadow in England for a while when he was equally talented, if not even more so. We won't know because they never fought each other because for whatever reason they never brought it together. But that guy had some game. He was as hard as they come.
Yeah, he had some. That would have been a good fight with him and Calzaghe. I don't know if not to take away from Calzaghe. Froch was a strong fighter, and Calzaghe was a very good, technical, smart fighter in the ring. Tough. Yep. I think it would have been a great fight. But back to what I'm saying is we have too many people, and this kind of ties into you as an attorney, why we have to have people look and protect fighters. My point is here to protect the fighter.
Right.
Okay? Financially, because we see this too much. Guys fight for years and years, end up walking away with nothing.
Right.
Okay. Not everybody is making a big contract all the time. But the guys who are earning decent wage in the sport of boxing, and even the guys aren't, they should be walking away with something. We don't have any health insurance or anything for ex-fighters.
Right.
You see, at least in the NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey, basketball, there is stuff there that are helping these athletes. We got fighters going out there, fighting once, twice a month, whatever, not making any money, getting busted up, when guys even making money. At the end of their career, physically, there's needs out there. Mm-hmm. So to my point of one unified structure, to set up a structure of, okay, here we are. These are our guidelines for today, tomorrow, and yesterday.
Right.
That's where I would like to see something for these fighters.
Yeah, Teddy Atlas and others over the years always talk about boxing needs a union. And it's been attempted a few times. I've had people reach out to me about it for as long as I've been an attorney, but there always seems to be some wrinkle where it doesn't get rolling,
Well, how about I'll throw this card, right? And, we're East Coast guys, and we know that union thing. Is it because that union will not be above board?
Then there's that possibility. But then there's the idea, it's like, well, everybody should kick in X percentage per fight, That's fine when you're making 5, 6 figures, 7 figures per fight, but does the guy that's 3 and 2 on the undercard want to kick in a percentage of him?
No, because you go like this, right? Let's talk about Major League Baseball, football, basketball. Mm-hmm. Your contract's guaranteed. Major League Baseball, there's a minimum your first year in the major leagues. I don't know what it is, but there is a minimum, right? So you're getting paid a minimum to sit on the bench, right?
Right.
So you got money coming in whether you play or not. If you're a C player or whatever.
Right.
Now, you kick in part of your dues, but you got money coming in. You take a young fighter who's fighting a 4-round fight, might be only getting $1,500, $2,000.
Right.
Now, it don't sound like a lot. Say that fighter's got to kick up, let's call it 10% of dues, $150. It doesn't sound like a lot. Right. But if he's got to put food on his table or whatever expenses he
owes somebody coming in.
Yes.
Child support.
Yeah, whatever he did to get there for that fight that he owes, right? Now it's a lot. So
Yep.
in a union aspect is without any minimums set for fights. And how are you going to tell a promoter, look, you got to put on a show, 4 rounds is worth this. You got to pay your fighter this. You got to pay your fighter that.
Right. You'll lose some small promoters too.
You're going to lose a lot of small
So,
promoters. You might lose some big promoters.
Right.
Because, but that's where I kind of get back where I like a Jake Paul or somebody that's bringing something fresh to the idea that, hey, I'm going to benefit, but the people that are on my cards, the fighters and whatnot, are going to benefit with me.
Right. Right.
As far as, okay, we're going to match you and we're going to pay you. I mean, the guy's putting it on Netflix now. What do you think this is going to be? This is going to be, the last Taylor Serrano fight was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Not only in ticket sales, but streams, pay-per-views, whatever you want to call them, right?
Right.
What do you think is going to happen now with Netflix? There's going to be a lot of money put into play for...
Yeah, it's an insane amount of viewership.
Yeah.
Also, and if Netflix likes what it's getting back as far as viewership, it could be the start of a beautiful thing.
This is basically what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it goes by him putting on a good card. Look,
Right.
It makes sense. Put Mike Tyson on the card, people looking like us, growing up, you've seen Tyson, me. I want to see what he looks like again. People who never saw him fight, that heard about him, are going to want to see him fight.
Right.
Right across the board.
Yep.
So I think it's a big aspect there. But couple of quick things for you,
Okay.
real quick here, on getting back to your end of it. You don't have to name some names, but I'm sure you've had some clients that in the boxing world you wanted to work with, and some did you ever turn down looking at someone's contract and say, nah, I can't work with you guys, or you're being unrealistic, or
I haven't turned down a client per se.
Yeah.
I've told them to take a walk on contracts plenty of times.
Why? Just being unrealistic, or just not?
You just take one look at some of them and you're like, they basically want everything from you, and they're giving you nothing guaranteed. So you might be happy in concept that you're on some notable regional promoters roster because they stage shows a few times a year, or even a major promoter's roster, but you're really getting nothing in return. And in some instances, even if you negotiate back and forth a little bit, they don't give you any ground because it's like maybe that fighter doesn't have leverage. So it's like, well, do you really want to take this? You have no. You're getting essentially nothing we asked for. It's like, I'm here for no reason. It's a take it or leave it proposition. So, but like I said earlier, I go as hard as the client wants to go, whether it's a boxer or a doctor.
Yeah.
You tell me, do you want this promotional agreement by any means necessary? Well, I'll go through the motions of a red line and tell you what I don't like, and if something becomes a problem, I can at least say I told you so. Or you could walk away from it and saying, you know what, Paul, it's garbage. It was garbage. I didn't realize it because I like the promoter. He puts on good shows. He has DAZN access. He has ESPN access, whatever it is. But it takes a lot of nerve to walk away from one, obviously, especially a big one. But you also have to be honest with yourself about what you feel like you should be getting, what your drop-dead points are. Like any decent negotiation, except a lot of boxers don't have leverage. So
fighter ever tell you, Paul, you don't know what you're talking about? Screw you.
Not the fighter, usually the promoter, right before we step up legal threats and things like that.
Yeah, because you're in a way the promoter. But when you bring it out to a fighter in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
You're sitting there. Are they surprised at the point you're hitting in the contract, or is it like, wow? And there's that lack of realization of what's really going on.
Yeah, I think it's been more of they appreciate what I've pointed out, whereas promoters will be like, oh, what is he talking about?
Right.
Yeah, I haven't seen him here before. How does he know? What does he know?
Yeah, well,
that's
the old boxing adage. The guy that nobody ever seen. Where did he come from?
Exactly. Well, it's like, there's been this mythology as long as I've been around boxing, probably well before that. Boxing's its own contractual netherworld, where it's kind of like, only people that are around it all the time and agree with the weird mess that goes on actually know what boxing's all about. I can't possibly look at a contract and tell you what's wrong with it. I have only been around boxing for this long, and I haven't hung out at the gyms or the smokers or anything else. Yeah, I do understand what they say because I understand what they all trigger. I understand the implications. That's why I'm there. I'm not there to be the promoter's friend and make him, acknowledge that I understand what he's saying. So I'm there for the fighter, or the next day I might be there for the promoter, and I'll go as hard at the fighter as I went at the promoter the day before.
Yeah, you're looking at it as a client coming in and saying, "Hey, I want to hire your services.
Yeah.
I need to be protected. What are your thoughts?"
Exactly. And if I could go as hard for a promoter one day as I'll go against them another day. They should appreciate that. I'm not going to just let them sign up a fighter with garbage,
Yeah, well,
that's not me doing my job ethically or professionally. So.
No, but it goes back to, like you said, that unseen adage of the fight world and has its own little culture and little things that go on behind the scenes and contracts and everything. The biggest thing I hear is it's just a basic contract. What do you need an attorney for?
Right. These are all standard terms.
Well, what the hell you mean what's a basic contract?
Right.
A basic contract to me is you and I, we shake hands. That's a basic contract.
Yeah, I mean, basic contract, realistic, the number of fights and purse, how many years, what are the extensions. Everything else,
right? Not
necessarily basic, Yeah,
because you have those little things. What advice would you give a fighter today? Guy coming into you and say, a manager brings somebody. What's your advice to a young fighter in the game today who's starting out, needs to protect themselves? What kind of advice would you give them?
I think you need to be patient with your contracts. You got to understand your contracts. You got to understand that the old cliche Rome wasn't built in a day. If you're pushing for bigger fights, you might get them before you're ready. You need to market yourself at least a little bit. Make your best you can. Not everybody has great PR. Not everybody knows how to use social media.
Mm-hmm.
A little something could go a long way, though. Because you're out there. You can't just say, "Oh, Jake Paul's a blight on the sport," because look at him being an a-hole on social media. You could do that too. Ryan Garcia does it. A couple other top-level fighters across the world do it. They get opportunity. You have Rolly Romero. There's a couple of guys out there that maybe they're not actually as talented as they might be perceived as being, but guess what? They've marketed themselves incredibly. So
Romero's, Garcia was doing it a lot more, and obviously he was with Golden Boy, so he had some juice at the time.
Right. And
Romero during the COVID time, he really started to up his game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and his name was thrown in with a fighter of ours during COVID. And he had a bad outing up in Mohegan Sun,
right?
Rolly, which is the fight that we had a fighter thrown in with, but it never materialized. But after that, he got in out of nowhere, and I kind of give him respect for that because he put himself in a position to make some good fights.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You find the time to do that between training. Maybe you have to work for a while. It could go a long way. I mean, not everybody's Rolly Romero, not everybody's Garcia,
not everybody is. But we also, we have people who do that for these people today. You can hire somebody to make that stuff happen if it's not if it's not for you. There are agencies, there are people out there that do that.
Whole industry of social media specialists. That's their whole day is taking care of 10 different clients' accounts, 20 different clients' accounts.
Getting you views, getting you out there, and making you. Look, Jake Paul did it by himself.
Yeah.
Him and his brother. They're crazy, those guys. But will we see you manage again?
I would manage if I were the legal part of a larger team. By that I mean, in lieu of paying me legal fees to review contracts, negotiate contracts, I would take a part of the percentage being taken from the fighter, but I would not kick in money into a management situation. I'm there in lieu of pay.
Right.
I get paid when they get paid. Be happy to do that. Most times it doesn't make sense financially for a manager to offer that up, but that's the condition I would do it again. And I'm not there to, for the gym memberships, for all the fees, for buying shorts anymore, for buying opponents until the guy has a promoter. I'm there for the legal if I'm ever managing again. So
I think that brings a value, especially with management or promotional companies that have multiple fighters that are moving and grooving. for you to have a little skin in the game with your equity right there.
Right.
Kind of, and it is a big part because, look, contracts are, being pushed out there left and right, whether they're for fights or promotional or managerial. A fighter has a lot to look at and to be protected. Right. What would you suggest, maybe this is a little bit out of what would you suggest for a fighter who is, moving along for his career, how to prepare for the end financially? What have you seen that you could suggest?
I think the same goes for a lot of athletes. I think you have to, assuming, you come from the bad background, limited means, whatever, as soon as you see money, it doesn't follow that you need the Maserati or the house in the hills, or got to be smart from the beginning, whether it's saving a couple of dollars per fight, putting it towards some sort of, interest-bearing account, or learning the market or something like that, smartly. I think, a lot of athletes are mangled and broke by the time they're in their 40s, no matter how much they made in their career. I'm saying in all sports, not just boxing. I could be talking about tennis, football, basketball, baseball.
There's a episode out on Netflix about the football players that have, been broke after making millions.
I mean, it's a mess. I have a client in the football world that has, some symptoms of,
CTE.
CTE or whatever. So he's part of the concussion lawsuits. And look, one day you have $20 million a year contract and a model wife, and the next day you're not able to take care of yourself 5 years after retirement. It's
right.
And I can't say that's necessarily any better in boxing, which has less money coming in towards the end. So, I mean, the more you could do to prepare for that, I'd say it's the better. But it's not, again, the same issue with the union. It's not easy to sack that money away when you're not making a lot of money. But if you do start making a decent dribble of money, be smart with it. I mean, any financial advisor would tell you that. They might have different ways of telling you that and what to invest in and what to put money in. But I think you have to find a way to be modest with your lifestyle until if and when you actually arrive. And even then, your career might be over any given fight in boxing.
Yeah. It's a short window for you to make, the one percenters, Canelo, Floyd,
yep.
Tyson Fury, Joshua, Wilder, they're all out there still making, and I know there's other ones out there.
Right.
But, but eventually it's going to come to an end for those guys too. I mean, your window is not 40, 50 fights that you're going to be earning. So,
right.
And it costs a lot for these guys with people around them. The more they make, the more it's being spent.
Right, for sure.
And guys don't understand the business end of that. And
to your point, the entourage should be kept small to the basics as best as possible. Also, that's always an issue in sports. There's a whole series about it on HBO in the early 2000s.
I mean, look, you got to treat yourself. Yeah. You're the business.
Yeah.
That's one thing is that the fighter is the business.
Yep.
All right, everybody else works for the fighter. At the end of the day, we all work for the fighter. Trainers, coaches, lawyers, we all work for that fighter. Without that fighter,
he's the reason for the season.
You're not collecting fees or whatever the case may be.
Right.
We're not training for fights. We're not getting, promotional companies are not having them out there either.
Right.
I don't think these guys sometimes treat themselves as, I'm the business.
Right.
And I don't mean it in the sense that, like, I'm sitting at, but hey, set yourself up like the business. So if you're going to put 10 people on, make sure those 10 people are going to be the right 10 people around you.
And have defined roles.
Exactly.
Are necessary for your team.
Right. No, I agree.
For advancing the ball,
Yeah, and it's like, look, like any other job, this is what you do. And, I had a guest last week, Jordan Kennis, who happened to work with Roger Mayweather.
Okay.
And was around, Floyd, Jeff Mayweather. He was around the Mayweathers.
Mm-hmm.
And, that dynamic, everybody sees Floyd on the thing, but those guys work for Floyd. They're not hanging out just, Floyd don't need people to hang out. They're doing something.
Right.
Roger worked for Floyd.
Right.
The guys that were around him that you see on HBO, whatever, drivers, security, whatever, all work for him. They have a role.
Right.
And Floyd drives the business.
And to your point, things like security, if you're not Floyd, maybe you don't need to spend the money on. But if you are Floyd, obviously that's an expense that you do need. You got to gauge that at all stages also. if you think you're the man because you could sell out, a 2,000 seat arena in Queens or something, and need an entourage with bodyguards and stuff, that's a good way to lose money probably. But if you're Floyd Mayweather,
Yeah, listen, if you're
that guy could throw in a hat and disappear. Mayweather cannot. So
yeah, and then look at that aspect too is you need people around you. Where in the Floyd Mayweather aspect, so look, there are some lunatics out there. You don't want people, coming at you or confronting you, or
right.
Especially now, again with social media, putting you in a situation where you don't want to be in a situation,
right?
And it's misconstrued off of that. But
right,
yeah, I mean, I like what I'm hearing. I think more people should speak like you to give information to fighters out there. I think, honestly, for what's being made in the sport, and I'll probably get hate on this, okay, but that's okay. There should be some education. Look, unions, you go into football, the union reps come in there, they talk to you about what it takes to be an NFL player, who to stay away from, what not to do, what to do, how to do it, when to do it. They give you that as a rookie, right? You go into camp. Nothing in the sport of boxing.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
there's no coaching how to act. There's no coaching how to talk to people. There's no coaching as far as look, NFL again. Agents are licensed by the NFL. Mm-hmm. You have to be registered with the NFL to represent a football player or to negotiate a contract for him. We don't have that in boxing.
No, I mean, there's a patchwork of different commissions. Like I had to take an exam to get my manager's license in New York. I had to study an area of New York regulation to get that. That's good. That means not every hump that wants to get a license is going to get one in New York. But it's also not uniform. It's a lot easier to get licenses in other states, I think, than it is New York, for example.
Yeah, you don't even have to. In some of these states, you go online, you fill out an application, and you got a license to coach in the corner.
Right.
To be a uniform manager should be, if you're going to be a manager, you're a manager in the United States. Okay, you have to take this and be certified here.
Right.
If you're going to go manage in Europe or whatever, that's a whole nother entity. But at least here, okay, Paul, you're good in the 50 states of the United States.
That'd be good. Yeah.
Okay, you're certified across the board. Same thing with levels of trainers. Okay, you should be qualified to coach whether it's in New York or L.A.
Right.
But each commission has their own regulations. I get it. There's fees. There's money. I understand it. And that, who knows? But
I just like the idea that somebody is saying, you can't just start calling yourself a manager. We need to license you to do that in this state. Even if they could do it between states, between fights. They want to know that there's somebody that's responsible.
What I say to everybody like this, think about this, right? Mm-hmm. You manage fighters. If you manage a Major League Baseball player, a professional basketball player, or a football player, doesn't entitle you to walk down to the field and be on the field with them.
Right.
Just because you're the manager.
Right.
I'm the manager. Managers can go anywhere in boxing, get credentials. They could be wherever, back of the room, this, that, by the ring. You need credentials by the NFL, MLB, NBA, whatever it is, to have you on the court, the field, or close to the players.
You remind me of a funny expression my daughters use. If I'm talking about something that's not really about me, they're like, Dad, you're not the main character. Sometimes you see managers and promoters that legitimately think they're like the main character. It's like, you're there because of the fighters. Like, why are you standing there like this or that?
No, I agree. You want to know something? Because at the end of the day, right, as a coach, I take my credibility by my peers. Mm-hmm. Okay? If a fighter wins and our team does the work, we win as a team. The fighter is the one who takes the glory.
Right.
That's what it is. And you know what? Like, you see it. You'll see some pictures, your managers, whatever. And look, at the end of the day, it's the fighter glory. That, you did this. We all worked as a team, but at the end of the day, you went out there in a sport by yourself and did it by yourself.
Right. Well, saying that it's the most loneliest places when they're in the ring or whatever during the fight. So
dressing room before the fight.
Yep.
John Scully. Loneliest is in the dressing room.
Yep.
Before, so, I get it, but hopefully as we see different places that we're starting to see fights start to evolve, things will start to change a little bit. Maybe the landscape will change. We see people come and go in this sport. Who's going to be the next Al Heyman? Who's going to be this guy? You never know in this sport. Somebody turns around and wants to be in boxing, and we don't know. Maybe, right now it's maybe like it's the housing market. The housing market is in Saudi right now for boxing. It's booming there. Right. We ride that wave, and it's a good thing for fighters.
I'm actually surprised there hasn't been like some billionaire Bitcoin bro that hasn't been involved with boxing the last 5 years.
Yeah, because Dana White's got him over there with crypto over there. What's the company? Yeah, it's Crypto Bitcoin. I think he has as a sponsor for
That's right.
UFC.
Yeah.
So you know what? He's already ahead of that.
He's on it. Yeah,
he's on it. But he's putting shows on across the world.
Yep.
And he has fighters from all over the world. You know what I mean? So it's like he gets it a little bit. But I really appreciate you coming on, and we kind of finish up with a couple of bullet questions here for everybody.
All right.
If everybody watched the show, they kind of know where I kind of go at the end. So, my first question always is to a guest is, if you were in a foxhole, who are you picking to be next to you?
In boxing?
Anywhere. Life. Dead or alive, you get one person. Who's going to be in that foxhole with you?
I'll keep it with boxing. Go Arturo Gatti.
All right. That's definitely a good one. Was definitely a warrior there, Arturo.
Too broad otherwise, but that's...
All right. I'm going to give you 3 dinner guests. Doesn't have to be boxers. Dead, alive. Who are you taking to dinner with you? You're going to sit there, have dinner, have a conversation. Who do you want?
Well, there's one deceased relative. I think it was my great-grandfather, Osias, I'm very interested in because he was supposedly a big landowner and mayor before the Holocaust over in Europe. And actually, when I first joined my local council, I was a councilman for a couple of years. My first speech, I referred to myself sharing something with him that I never had the chance to share because we were never alive at the same time. Mm-hmm. I would be interested to hear what local government was like for him in Poland or modern-day Ukraine. I think was where most of our family actually came from back then when there was land being owned and farms and everything else, and sort of what that was like. I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah,
I'd say that probably honestly, I'd probably fill up. There's all sorts of family members, but I mean, just to keep it interesting, I'm intrigued, and we've talked about this off camera. I've always been a sort of a student of reading about the history of organized crime. Meyer Lansky is such a lionized figure for how supposedly sophisticated and intelligent and revolutionary he was for the traditional structure of organized crime. It'd be interesting to hear him speak,
Yeah, I think to sit down and listen to him in business and life lessons would be very, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like, how much is the actuality and how much is the legend? I'd be very curious. And same thing with Luciano, guys like the guys that were there when they formed the modern day organized crime structure. But then going from there, obviously you have to go with somebody that's legitimately worthy of the historical praise. Somebody like Lincoln, George Washington, somebody like that, where you're like, this is a legitimately monumental person in history that I'd want to pick his brain and see what he'd be curious about me as well. So
what they were thinking and what their thoughts and aspirations were.
Would I be impressed with them today, listening to them speak versus what they're written about?
What we've read about them and what we've seen in documentaries and everything else. Well, I mean, I appreciate you coming up here. Why don't you tell everybody where we can find you, Attorney Paul Haberman?
Certainly. So I am in the process of merging my law firm with another law firm, but the addresses will remain the same. My website is paulhabermanlaw.com. My Instagram for my law firm is Paulie Haberman. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I'm also on Twitter at Standing 8 Court, which is a homage to an old column I had on 8countnews.com, a now defunct boxing website where I wrote over 70 articles on boxing-related legal and regulatory matters.
Awesome. So, fighters out there, you need anything legality-wise, questions, please talk to Paul. Before you sign a contract, before you do anything in your career. You questioned. He's been a very good advocate for people that we know and has become a very good friend. He is a boxing guy, and we appreciate him being here. A couple of thanks today to my guys at Nirvana Water. Appreciate you guys keeping us hydrated over at the gym. Check them out on Instagram at Nirvana Super. And my guys at Legend Barbershop, Cesar Collado, appreciate you for tightening me up today. And we'll catch you again on Coach's Corner.
Thank you for having me again.